I've always been drawn to stories of adventure and magic, so when I found an old, dusty map in my grandmother's attic, I knew I had stumbled onto something extraordinary. The map was unlike any I'd ever seen. It wasn't just a map of the land, it was a map of something else, something ancient. The edges were frayed, and the ink was faded, but one thing was clear. It marked the location of a dragon's lair. I laughed at first, dismissing it as a relic of my grandmother's wild imagination. She'd always been a storyteller, spinning tales of mythical beasts and enchanted forests. But the more I studied the map, the more I began to wonder, could it be real? Could there really be a dragon hidden away in some forgotten corner of the world? I became obsessed, spending days researching the history of dragons and the legends surrounding them. Most people thought they were just myths, but there were a few stories, old, obscure ones, that spoke of dragons in hushed tones, as if they were something more than fantasy. And then there was the map, pointing to a remote mountain range far from any modern civilization. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. I needed to see for myself, to find out if there was any truth to the stories. I packed my gear and set off, following the faded lines of the map, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. I knew it was a crazy idea, but something about it felt right, like it was something I was meant to do. The journey to the mountains was long and arduous. The terrain was rough, and the weather was unforgiving, but I pressed on, driven by a strange sense of purpose. As I got closer to the marked location, I began to notice odd things. The air grew colder, the wind more biting. The trees around me seemed twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like claws. There was a heaviness in the air, a feeling that something was watching me. On the third day, I reached the base of the mountain. The map indicated a cave hidden high up in the cliffs. I started my ascent, carefully picking my way up the rocky slope. The higher I climbed, the more the air seemed to change. It was thick with the smell of smoke and sulfur, and every breath felt like it was searing my lungs. I knew I was getting close. As I neared the entrance to the cave, I stopped to catch my breath. That's when I saw it. Etched into the rock above the cave was a symbol, a strange, spiraling shape that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light. It was the same symbol I'd seen on the map, and it filled me with both awe and dread. I knew I had found the dragon's lair. With a deep breath, I stepped into the darkness of the cave. The air inside was even thicker with smoke, and the ground was littered with bones, some small, some disturbingly large. I could feel the heat radiating from deeper within, and I could hear the faint sound of something breathing, a low, rumbling exhale that shook the walls of the cave. I continued deeper into the cave, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The walls were covered in strange markings, runes I couldn't understand but felt an instinctive fear of. The further I went, the louder the breathing became, a steady rhythm that echoed in my ears and made my skin crawl. I was about to turn back, to give up on this insane quest, when I saw it. In the center of a vast chamber, illuminated by a dim, flickering light, lay the dragon. It was massive, its scales a deep, iridescent black that shimmered like oil in the darkness. Its eyes were closed, but I could see the rise and fall of its chest with each breath, the curl of smoke rising from its nostrils. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a creature of myth and legend brought to life. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. I had found what I was looking for, but now that I was here, I realized I had no plan. The dragon shifted slightly, its tail twitching, and I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew I should leave, should get out while I still could, but something held me there, a strange compulsion to stay, to see what would happen next. As I watched, the dragon's eyes slowly opened. They were a piercing, fiery gold that seemed to look right through me. I felt a sudden wave of fear and awe wash over me, my legs trembling as I struggled to keep my footing. I slowly crouched behind a large boulder, trying to steady my breath. It looked around the cavern, its eyes moving methodically as if sensing my presence. I held my breath, trying to remain as still as possible. Suddenly, the dragon inhaled deeply, and I could feel the air being pulled toward it, as if it was sucking the very breath from my lungs. The force was immense, and I struggled to hold onto the rock, my fingers digging into the stone. Then, with a mighty exhale, the dragon let out a plume of smoke and fire that illuminated the entire cavern. The heat from the dragon's breath was intense, almost unbearable. I could feel the sweat pouring down my face, my clothes sticking to my skin. I knew I had to move, to do something, but I was paralyzed by fear. The dragon's gaze continued to sweep the room, and then it stopped. Its eyes locked onto the boulder where I was hiding. My heart raced. I knew it had sensed me, perhaps even seen me. I tried to control my breathing, my mind racing with possible ways to escape. The dragon lowered its head slightly, nostrils flaring as it took in my scent. I could hear a low rumble, a growl that seemed to come from deep within its chest, reverberating through the stone around me. And then, in a sudden burst of movement, the dragon lunged forward, its massive head crashing into the boulder I was hiding behind. The force of the impact sent me sprawling backwards, my flashlight skittering across the ground. I scrambled to my feet, the dragon's eyes now directly upon me. There was no mistaking it. It knew I was there, and it wasn't pleased. I backed away slowly, my hands raised in a feeble attempt to show I meant no harm. The dragon's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought it might let me go. But then it opened its mouth, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth, each one as long as my arm. A low, rumbling growl filled the chamber, and I knew I had to act fast. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I sprinted back the way I had come. I could hear the dragon behind me, its massive body crashing through the cave, shaking the ground with every step. The air was filled with the sound of its growls and the rush of its breath, hot and foul-smelling, like burning sulfur. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my feet barely touching the ground as I leaped over rocks and debris. The cave seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in around me as the dragon's roar filled the air. I could feel the heat of its breath on my back, could hear the snap of its jaws just behind me. And then, just as I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw a small opening in the cave wall ahead, a narrow passage that was just big enough for me to squeeze through. Without thinking, I dove for it, my body twisting as I slid into the narrow gap. I felt the rush of air as the dragon snapped its jaws shut just behind me, its roar of frustration echoing through the cave. I crawled through the narrow passage as fast as I could, my heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could still hear the dragon behind me, its growls and roars growing fainter as I moved deeper into the passage. After what felt like an eternity, I finally emerged into a smaller chamber, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath, my heart still pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe I had made it out alive. My mind was racing, filled with a mix of fear, relief, and awe. I had seen a dragon, a real, living dragon, and somehow I had survived. But my relief was short-lived. As I sat there, trying to catch my breath, I noticed something strange. The chamber I was in was different from the rest of the cave. The walls were smooth and polished, almost as if they had been carved by hand. And there in the center of the room was a large stone pedestal. I stood up slowly, my body aching with fatigue, and made my way over to the pedestal. On top of it was a small, ornate chest, covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But then, curiosity got the better of me. I reached out and carefully lifted the lid. Inside the chest was a small glowing stone, unlike anything I had ever seen. It pulsed with a soft, warm light, and I could feel a strange energy radiating from it. I knew somehow that this stone was the reason the dragon had been guarding this cave. It was something powerful, something ancient and dangerous. I carefully picked up the stone, feeling its warmth in my hand. As I did, I felt a strange sensation wash over me, a mix of fear and exhilaration. I knew that whatever this stone was, it was important, and it was now my responsibility. Made my way back through the narrow passage, clutching the stone tightly in my hand. I could still hear the distant growls of the dragon, but they seemed farther away now, as if the creature had given up its pursuit. I knew I had to get out of the cave, to find a way back to the surface before the dragon decided to come after me again. As I emerged from the passage, I found myself back in the main chamber, the dragon nowhere to be seen. I moved cautiously, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The cave was silent now, the air thick with tension. I made my way toward the entrance, my heart pounding with each step. Just as I reached the mouth of the cave, I heard a low, rumbling growl behind me. I turned to see the dragon emerging from the shadows, its eyes locked onto the stone in my hand. It let out a deafening roar, and I knew I had no choice. I ran, sprinting out of the cave and down the mountainside, the stone glowing brighter with each step. I didn't stop until I was far from the cave, my body aching, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew I had escaped, but I also knew that my journey was far from over. The dragon's stone was a powerful artifact, and now it was mine. I didn't know what it meant or what I would do with it, but I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same